Is there another
I'm just
chair I
reading
can
this?
use as
Yep,
a
go
foot
ahead.
prop?
Like right now?
Sure.
We're started?
Yep. Let's live.
I can't see myself.
I can't see myself either.
I know.
We
I'll
have to
switch
see
the camera in a
ourselves.
second. We got to start the episode, though. So read us our disclaimer,
Oh, go ahead and
please.
read this.
Yeah.
Would you like me to say this at the top?
What's that say?
Education episode.
Oh, no, that's all right.
All right.
Even though you just did.
Okay, so I'm going to read it then.
Yep, go
Okay.
ahead.
The Project Ion podcast is designed to be a platform for entertainment. Accordingly, the people appearing on the podcast may engage in jokes, hyperbolic comments, comedic exaggerations, and other similar behavior. We have the utmost faith in our audience to discern material which is genuine from that which is in jest.
Thank you for that lovely disclaimer, Desiree.
You're welcome.
Welcome, episode 19. We got a lot of special guests with us. Laura Condon Rosendahl. Number one, how are you, Laura?
I'm good.
Why are you
Good.
laughing so much?
Because she always does this.
Oh, you too. They laugh.
Desiree Welty, how are you?
I'm well.
Good.
Don't call me by my last name.
Call her by her middle and last.
No!
Do you
Earl?
even know her middle name?
It's the let's see.
No, it's okay.
Yeah, I do.
I
know
trust
it.
you. Yep, we know
I
what
won't
you
throw
say.
it out there.
Appreciate it. Nice to see you, Jimmy. Bless you.
Earl, how are you?
I'm great.
Okay, so this is a special episode where we're going to do a deep dive into educational subjects
Stop looking at me.
because we've got 3 educators with us. So all this expertise, we can't take advantage of the opportunity. Can't miss the opportunity. So
Expertise, thanks.
without further ado, let's dive into some buzzwords. We're going to read them off and see what you gals think. So this website is
Fake news.
called Glossary for Educational Buzzwords. So could you guys explain some of these to me? How about what's 21st century learning mean?
Would that be employability? That's what I look at it. Or in technology incorporation?
Yeah, preparing
Yeah,
Preparing
students
kids
for
for-
some financial standards and stuff in there as well.
So 21st century skills, things you'd need to know in order to live in the 21st century.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Earl?
I agree. Technology is the biggest one for me.
I have nothing
I
to add.
got distracted by that.
What's child-centered learning mean?
I think maybe they mean student-centered learning.
Yeah, I've not seen child centered.
Yeah, that's
Student-centered is
a
focused on.
weird use of the word child.
We're
Can
gonna
Can you
gonna
see,
change
three
it.
see it okay?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Do any of those jump out to you as like,
So, well, student-centered, the students have to enjoy whatever they're learning, so tying the content to what students enjoy and not based off of my needs, based off of students' wants and needs. Or child-centered, if you want to word it that way.
which one are we looking at there?
Child-centered / student-centered learning.
Well, they actually have a definition in here.
What's it
Let's see
say?
what it says. For child-centered, that's what we were looking at?
Yeah.
Okay. Fundamental tenet of progressivism is child-centered learning rooted in the belief that educators should teach the child, not the subject. They reject the idea of lectures, drills, and rote learning because, according to them, it ignores the feelings and individuality of the child. In the middle school or high school, the term commonly applied is student-centered learning. Canadian public schools experimented with child-centered learning following the 1968 appearance of the Ontario Hall Dennis Report. Do any of you know what that is?
That report? No.
Yeah. Okay. I've never heard of it.
But when you're done reading, I have some comments on stuff I'm reading.
Okay. Well, you go. Feel free to interrupt me if you gotta.
I have a question though. Are our viewers seeing this right now, or are they seeing
Us.
us?
Yep, they're seeing this.
Okay.
Now they're looking at us.
Okay, so my first comment is they reject the idea of lectures, drills, and rote learning because, according to them, it ignores the feelings and individuality of the child. Well, I think you need a little bit of rote learning and lecture for that base or background knowledge before you can actually have a student do some exploration or higher order thinking, like analysis or creation. They have to have that base first. So I don't know if I see their thought, I just don't know if I necessarily agree with the idea of rejecting those things.
So what they spell out here is a little bit too strong for you, at least in that
Yeah.
regard.
Not
Okay.
saying I disagree with the idea of students guiding their own, education or thoughts or opinions. It's just you need some sort of background or base of what's being studied before you can take it that step further. It's just my opinion.
we
I
got
definitely see that.
a comment in the chat already.
Is it from
awesome. I bet
Gerald
it-
Greenberg wants to
knew
know
it.
what's higher order thinking.
We're not to that.
I actually
word
just
yet.
addressed it a little bit.
Oh yeah, you kind of did.
Okay, so like when I was talking about rote learning, so there's this thing called I'm gonna go back to my teacher education here, guys. Bloom's taxonomy, that like memorization, that'd be rote learning. And then higher order thinking would be analysis and creation. Right?
Boom.
Do I need to explain what analysis and creation is?
I feel like that person probably needs to know that.
I've heard the words before, but treat me as though I'm the complete layperson and have no idea. So you can't make it too simple.
Like you want an example from my classroom?
Sure.
Okay, so we talk about like vocabulary when kids get a vocabulary word. Essentially what you want them to be able to do is be able to use that word within their own context. But before they can do that, they have to know what it means, and that requires a little bit of rote learning or memorization. Then after that, they have to have some analysis, so they have to look at it and some examples and analyze whether or not it works within that context before they can apply it to their own, which is creation, and that's higher order thinking.
Okay. Interesting. So, okay, do any of these, what, somebody said one of these jumped out at them was kind of like confusing, who said that?
I think that was the child-centered learning, but I think
Okay.
we just looked at that.
All right.
Mhm.
Holistic whole child development. What's that? Have we heard that one
Is it
before?
socially emotional
Probably.
academic
Yes.
development, not
Yeah.
just focusing on academic?
Okay. Personalized learning, would that be like an offshoot of differentiation?
Mm,
More
I would say more so an offshoot of the student-centered learning
Mm-hmm.
Agreed.
Why?
because like it's personalized to their like interest level,
Career aspirations.
career aspirations. So like, well, I can't think of a math example, I guess. Can you think of one in English examples?
Personalized
Yeah.
learning. The only thing I can think of is like, okay, so like, let's say a kid wants to be a construction worker, then them taking like intermediate comp would not be realistic because you write research papers and construction workers aren't going to do that. So then you'd want them to take more of like a vocational English class where they learn like writing or reading they'd actually use on the job. And for them, it's probably just going to be like, let's fill out a resume, a cover letter. How do
Yeah.
we take notes in a logical order? Things like that.
Yeah, that one's really hard to do in each specific classroom.
Yeah, because that seems to me like that would manifest itself in the way the kid chooses to arrange their class schedule. You know, I prefer wood shop to home ec, ergo I take wood shop. You know what I mean?
Right.
So
But I think with personalized learning, they're saying, okay, let's not just give them your basic English classes. Let's give them English
Mhm.
classes that are going to gear them for the skills they'll actually use on the job site. Because I'm going to be completely honest with you, the skills the standards have me teach aren't necessarily the skills that they're going to
necessarily
utilize on the job
Mhm.
site, honestly, if they were to be a construction worker.
Okay. What's an enriched curriculum? Bueller, anyone?
Well,
Good question.
you know, curriculum is what we teach, enriched.
You know, with a
Like-
few extra calories in the curriculum. Is it?
Yeah.
Okay, should we turn to the glossary? All right.
Sure.
Providing students with an academic, creative, or athletics curriculum that exceeds
Interesting.
provincial standards is usually what's meant by enrichment.
Mm.
So I think this website's maybe Canadian. We were talking about
Oh.
provinces and stuff, but
Okay.
Okay.
I would think there would be some
Excuse me.
overlap in two Western countries, but
Yeah, so is it kind of like tag or, you know, a kid has already mastered this standard, what can we do beyond that to extend his learning, his
that
or
makes
her
sense.
learning?
Okay. Interesting.
Maybe that comes from like just because a kid is smart doesn't mean they shouldn't grow at the same pace as a kid who's average.
Right, and a
What
lot
can
of
you
the
do?
They're still being
emphasis
pushed.
and a lot of the emphasis is how do we get our lower level kids to meet the standards and not, okay, our high ability learners have met the standards, how do we get them to move past that?
Mm-hmm.
Gerald says, so do we need personalized classes for 450 different kids?
Ideally, that would be great, but there's just not the funding for it.
Yeah,
Like,
Gerald.
honestly, if we could offer a vocational English class for those kids that want to do more manual labor, that would be awesome. But we just don't have the teachers or the funding or.
Mm-hmm. Gerald also would like to hear from the lady in the Iowa State shirt.
Well, hi, Gerald.
I looked down. Nope.
Big thing
You
after
wanted me on
the
the podcast, Jimmy. Keep that in mind.
one thing after the personalized learning,
it.
it looks a little different for the younger kids. So for the higher students in high school, they can choose those classes, and so it's more personalized. Where the younger kids have to be in the primary grades in those classes. So what I have noticed for personalized learning in the primary classes, the content that is taught can be differentiated different ways using student interests. So if a student is working on work on writing, one could be on ABCs, but it's using something of their choice. They could be using flashcards. It's them choosing what activity, what way they're going to learn that content. So that's how I've seen that used there. And same with word work. Some use it with technology. Some like to use a paper and pencil or whiteboard. It's just depending on whatever they want to use. So that's how it's kind of personalized in the primary grades. Gerald.
Yeah, that
Okay.
brings up a good point too. Like even in the higher classes, teachers can personalize it too by, okay, prove to me what you're learning that it has occurred, but you can choose how you want to do that. Are you going to make
Yep.
a product, or do you want a test?
Yep.
You get to choose how you want to prove that you've learned.
Which exactly is what standardized testing does not allow kids to do.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
So no, we aren't 3 non-fans of standardized testing. Is that what I'm gathering? Or
It's not that I'm a non-fan. I'm a non-fan at how they're currently done. Like they're getting better. This year's tests, I think, are more aligned to what we're expected to teach, but there's still a disconnect between not only the content but also the skills or practices we're expected to teach, because those skills and practices aren't measured or tested on the test. And
Like
so,
what we were talking about with
Mhm.
mine. So I have to teach not just kids publishing a writing piece, but the whole process it takes to get to that point. I'm supposed to teach the process. But when they write their essay on the standardized test, they just want the final product from the kids. They don't want to see their process. So
That's the most important part is the process.
is the
itself.
process. Yeah, I agree.
And I see at the primary level with standardized testing, students are learning how to test. And a lot of times I know there's fluency and things like that. That's important, but they are docked so much on not meeting the time frame, let alone the skill. So they may have the skill down, but it does not reflect that. So that's where I have some grief with the standardized testing, because it doesn't reflect the whole child because of that time frame on it.
Right, and that is one nice thing about the new Iowa assessments is they're not timed, so a kid could take as long as they want to do it.
but is there any utility or value in the standardized test as far as, okay, well, it gives us an idea of general trends and that sort of thing? I mean, I know that you can't. I think by very virtue of it being a standardized test, then obviously it is at odds with everybody's unique person attitude. So, but I mean, would there be value in saying, okay, well, we can see kind of big picture, 30,000 feet, generally what's going on?
For me, with FAST, that's my standardized test. It's nice to have obviously a whole picture, but there's a couple, depending on the subset skill, that we have to just go off of our own assessments when looking at how far the child has come versus that snapshot. Some of the skills I could use to say this is a true snapshot, and those are the open-ended, not timed skill tests. But the ones that are timed aren't always the true snapshot, so that's where it's a little different. So some of those can be helpful, some of them not so much.
And I would say at the high school level, in order to have a true snapshot, that would have to be under the assumption that all kids are genuinely taking the test.
Mm-hmm.
That's a good point.
Right. So, well, no, it's not because they didn't even try.
Right.
And so you're comparing them to their peers, which would be a good thing. But so in a perfect world, every kid tries the best they can. Everyone takes it like at the same time, because how is it fair for people who take it at the beginning of the testing period versus schools that take it at the way end, while those
Mhm.
kids have gotten another month of learning before taking the test. So it's a good measure of where kids are to their peers and where their general growth is, but at the same time it's not really standardized because it's not consistent in when and
Mm-hmm.
sometimes even how it's administered. So
And that's a big issue that I have seen. That isn't whether sometimes you get subs, sometimes you don't get subs, and that changes the validity of the test.
And one of my problems is, and I think, Jimmy, you may have touched on this a little bit, is that the whole idea of standard. That's to assume that all kids are learning at the same standard,
Mhm.
at the same
Mhm.
pace. They're all, meeting whatever the core standards are, and that's just not realistic. Also, in teacher
Yeah.
education, you're taught you have to differentiate your assessments, yet you're giving us one assessment to assess all kids.
Mm-hmm.
It just seems kind of counterintuitive.
Kyle says, without standardized tests, how do we hold schools accountable?
Ask Betsy DeVos.
Who's Betsy DeVos?
Sorry. I took
That's an
this.
inside joke that
I made this. I took
She-
this the political
she's-
route.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
Okay.
sorry. Let's not do that.
Kyle also said, tell me about CGI. I don't know what that is. Computer
Generated image.
CGI is in math,
Or
cognitive
CGI.
guided
That's what I think
instruction, math-wise,
Computer. I think of
GMUN, or
computer generated
computer.
image.
Yeah. Does
think
he
you
mean
mean-
CGI math?
I think he's referring to probably math. At least at the primary level, it's not the black and white. 2 + 2 is 4. They want you to come up with different ways of seeing 2 + 2 is 4. So they don't want the standard algorithm. It's more exploration. So if I were to give a problem, students can come up with it using whatever tools they deem to have. And once the student solves it, they're not done moving on to the next problem. They have to find different ways to solve the problem.
Is
So
this
it's
part of that new math?
yes.
So
And
what's that?
cognitive guided instruction, that's CGI.
Oh, is this a business where you like do subtraction to figure out addition problems and stuff, or
So it's more so having that open
Yeah.
mindset
Yeah, that
when
could be a
problem
way.
solving.
I think the goal is kids, if done correctly, it's supposed to allow kids to have a better sense of numbers and how they work. And
Hmm.
if you have a better sense of numbers, you are better off throughout your entire math career, because if you know how numbers work, then you're better able to do algebra and all those other
Yep.
skills. And so, we have kids at the high school level who don't know how to add or subtract fractions because they don't know how fractions work.
Hmm.
They don't really understand what fractions are. And so by allowing them to explore what numbers do and how they interact with each other when you perform different operations on them, it theoretically will give them a better understanding of
Yeah.
numbers and math itself.
okay? Has that been true for a long period of time where kids at the high school can't do fractions or can't add and
It
subtract?
wasn't as bad when I first started. I think it has gotten worse. But we haven't gotten the kids who have started with the number sense CGI type stuff. And so it'll be interesting to see how that changes as those kids progress through.
Because would it be fair to say that the trend has been for a long time that at like the elementary level you learn your times tables and
Mhm.
you kind of learn math by
Memorizing.
memorization?
Do they
yeah.
learn times tables still?
No, at least not from what I've been exposed to and seen. It's just more so understanding the ones, tens, hundreds place value and what that means and breaking down whatever type of problem that is.
Right, and see, there's a little bit of problem in that because the times table teaches more than just multiplication because there's a pattern involved. Because once you get the pattern, you can essentially multiply without actually multiplying.
Mhm.
And so then we have the issue of kids coming to high school not being able to recognize patterns, and that's a huge issue in linear functions
Mhm.
because that's just a pattern. The slope is constant. You're going to add or subtract the same thing. And if you don't understand linear concepts, you can't understand quadratic, exponential, any other function there is.
Right.
And so the lack of pattern recognition is maybe going to be a struggle down the line for them.
Well,
Definitely see that.
so my question is, we keep trying to find new ways to teach concepts, but the old ways worked at some level because, I mean, you didn't have this new stuff and you're a math teacher. So do you think at some point some of this is just the kids?
Some of it is. I mean, I've always been good at math, so that's never really been a struggle for me. Like, I remember back to like 5th grade, we had this problem where the teacher put up like 2 bottles, or one was like a really tall vase that was really skinny, and one was like a half-gallon milk carton that was shorter but fatter. And she asked which one of these will hold more water, and I was the only kid in the class who knew that the bigger object, regardless of how tall it was going to hold more water. And but I don't know. I mean, yeah, it just seems the issue is there's more kids than there should be that don't understand things at the high school level, and I think it's even at the middle school level. And so, I mean, the way kids' brains work are different now than they were when we were in school.
And speaking of that, I think part of the problem is just the lack of ability to visualize, like you said with your teacher with the vases and using that. Like, if kids want to, determine fractures, they could visualize that in their own heads. But even in terms of reading them, able to visualize a story or visualize details is nearly impossible.
I think going along with what Desiree said, the problem solving with that, whether it be math, but specifically talking about math, students, whether it be things going on in their academic life or personal life, trying to problem solve through any situation, let alone a math problem, they struggle with that. And if they don't see it through that one track mind way, if they can't solve that math problem this way, they're just shutting down. And I don't feel like that's how it was necessarily us growing up, where they're struggling with that now.
Right. Kids, well, with video games and stuff, they have that instant gratification, and when they're not given that, even if they are right, if they're not given that, yeah, you're right, keep going, they won't keep going because they don't want to unless they're right. And so they don't even know enough to like go back and check if their answer even makes sense. And so I think
that self-reflection.
Yeah. And part of that too is the technology. Their brains are just different than ours were when we were in school. But they've adopted, like in the math, there's the 8 math practices, and perseverance in solving problems is one of them. And that's kind of a blessing with our high school math teachers, is they focus a lot on those math practices and the skills behind it, because if they know that, if they encounter a problem they don't know, they should be able to work through it, whether they have all the content skills or not. It's just a matter of getting the kids to master the skills of the math practices.
Not only be able to master, but to have the motivation to even do it. Motivation is the biggest problem. I think, speaking for the 3 of us, the fact that we're teachers probably enjoyed school and did well at it to some extent, but that's not every single kid. Not every single kid enjoys school, and they simply won't do it. Not because they don't know how, they just simply don't want to.
Right. That's a good point.
Well, I've got a video queued up on differentiation. So would somebody sort of lay out what differentiation is for the listeners who are uninformed?
I hear Mr. G Money is very uninformed. Like Desiree said earlier when talking about standardized assessments, the differentiation is just piggybacking off of that. not just having one track mind, one track lesson, that this is one size fits all students. All your students are going to learn differently, and you try your best to reach all students, and having different activities based off of students' wants and needs to best fit them. That's more so the differentiation, whether it be high, average, or low students. You're having things to activities to meet those students with the content.
Okay, thanks for that definition.
You
Well,
clearly don't like it.
no, I don't.
I thought it
I'm-
was great.
I'm thinking of the. So, what's the background on the concept? Because I don't believe that differentiation has been around for the entirety of public
background.
education.
Well,
It
I feel
was
like there are a lot
around.
of concepts that have been around for the entirety of education, and we just relabel them.
Okay.
Yeah. Like I remember in high school too how like I was given a different set of problems in math, and a few of my friends than other kids in the same class just because I was more advanced so I could handle like deeper, tougher problems. And so that I didn't know that's what was
Was
happening at the
differentiation.
time, but and it might not have even been called differentiated instruction back then. That's the thing, is a lot of these things aren't new. They're just called something different.
Mhm.
It's
I think where the struggle is, there's a lot of differentiation in terms of assessment, but there's not a lot of differentiation in terms of explicit teaching or direct
Mhm.
teaching. I think that's
Mhm.
where the problem lies. And I think that's what's the hardest for teachers to manage is how do I teach differently for 30 kids in the classroom
Mhm.
where 5 of them need this style and 2 of them need this and 10 of them need something else.
Okay. Well, we'll see what the video has to say, and if you want to interrupt or something, I can stop it at any time and just kind of start talking, and I'll try to.
Is this video also Canadian?
Nope.
Diversity has become a defining feature of Alberta's classrooms.
Oh, yeah, it is.
Students are people with a wide range of interests and abilities, and diverse learning strengths and needs, including students with disabilities. Differentiated instruction is a philosophy that acknowledges that students learn at different rates and in many different ways. Differentiated instruction benefits students because it promotes an environment in which learning differences are not just tolerated, they are valued. Carol Ann Tomlinson, one of the early advocates of this approach, describes differentiation as shaking up what goes on in the classroom so that students have multiple opportunities to explore concepts, make sense of ideas, and demonstrate what they know and understand. Differentiated instruction can take many forms. For example, teachers can provide materials and learning tasks at different levels of challenge, or provide different levels of support in the classroom, depending on student needs. When done effectively, differentiated instruction is a seamless part of everyday instructional planning and classroom practice. It is woven throughout the school day and informs how physical space of the classroom is organized, what learning resources are used, how instruction is planned and delivered, how student learning is assessed. The very nature of differentiated instruction means that it will look very different in every learning environment, depending on the students, teachers, and learning contexts.
I've got a question about some of this. So there seems to be almost no end to the amount of things that can be differentiated.
Basically.
Correct.
And then there's also no end to the depth of what can constitute differentiation. So it seems to me that it would be very onerous and burdensome on any teacher that's trying to like maximize their differentiation all the time. And is that a reasonable thing to ask somebody in a public school setting where they've got certain standards and benchmarks to meet and that sort of thing, and you've got however many other things that you've got to try to accomplish in a school day, and then you're also expected to like, endlessly assess everybody for their own specific needs? Is it too much to ask, I guess, is the
Well, to do like
big
each
question.
individual student, probably. But like there are certain things that students have in common in terms of maybe their ability or interest. And so you can kind of group them in different ways to instill, so you're not differentiating like individually, but more like group wise based on a different set of criteria.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you keep the concept from sort of running amok then? You know what I mean? So like you could have almost this race to the bottom where somebody's trying to out differentiate the next teacher and be like, well, look how different I am because I'm
I don't
you
think anyone does that because it is so complex.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not.
and
It's
it's a
something
lot
you
of
wouldn't want to
work.
win.
That's
Yeah.
like that's not something I imagine many teachers are in competition with each other
so it
over.
would be
Yeah.
more like how do I well, okay, but then at the same could you say on the other
I
side
differentiated for 5 kids today. How about you?
Only 2.
Beat ya.
Well, so then on the other side of that coin though, if it's sort of something that everybody pays lip service to, then is it really that useful?
Well, okay, so like in our intro to Algebra 1 class, we have kids who shouldn't be there because they don't even know, they don't have the skills they need to even be successful in algebra. Their like understanding of math is low that they can't understand how algebra works. And then you have the majority of kids in that class who are placed accurately. And then there's still a handful of kids who should have been in algebra to begin with. So Intro to Algebra 1 is slowed down. It's kind of 2 times the pace of normal algebra. So our teacher has to meet the needs of like 3 different sets of kids. So one thing she does is she takes a time and creates a video of the lesson prior to the day and then posts that on Classroom. So those kids that are more advanced can just watch the video and move on, do their homework or their assignment or whatever they have to do. Then the kids who need more help, she teaches the lesson to them during the class time, and then they get on with their work just fine, and then she has that extra time to work with those low kids. So she teaches that content in a couple of different ways to meet the needs of those varying abilities.
And I think you mentioning with your lower level math class, if we were talking about differentiation in terms of skill alone, ideally we would have different classes
Mhm.
that we could recommend. I say recommend because you can't, I think it's tracking if you force kids.
Right.
And I think that's illegal from what I remember. Tracking
I-
tracking kids.
I
But
feel
anyways,
like- I feel like that's
you
true.
recommend that they
Very
go
highly
into
recommend.
highly recommend a kid go into a certain class based on their skill level. Again, that goes back to not having enough teachers, not having enough funding.
Okay. Anything
And of
more?
course, that tracking is based on data, whether it's
Right.
like continuous data, not data from like just the standardized test. It's data from their success in classrooms years prior, or if there's like our middle school does fast math, and so that would be a data that follows them year round. It's not just testing their skill at one point. It's testing them throughout the year, and do they have enough skills, and what's their score based on how they've achieved throughout the year. And so it's not just, placing them based on, oh, that kid's name sounds cool, I think he should go into algebra.
Or hey, he works well with others in class. Let's put him in calculus.
Right. So hopefully with more data to look at, more assessments, to do that, you can more accurately place the kids where they need to be. And then differentiation is a whole lot easier because you have like ability kids in the same class. And so then you might differentiate based on interest or something other than
Learning
content or
style.
skill.
And I'm glad we
Yeah.
watched this video because every time I think differentiation, I'm so focused on skill level and content knowledge that's when I think of differentiation. I kind of like pigeonhole myself into that. But then this brought up, oh, it's environment and it's interest. And yeah, it is a very broad term.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we actually have a couple of teachers who at the high school who utilize the flexible seating in their classrooms too, because a kid who's fidgety probably can't sit in a normal desk for too long without needing to cause noise or move around. So if you give him a standing desk, then he can fidget or take a little walk without being as distracting as he would have been before.
Is there a direct relationship between the amount of differentiated stuff and then like behavior problems? So as the like, or maybe I guess what I'm saying, like, would it be in the inverse where the more areas that there's differentiation, so like you gave the seating example and that sort of thing, does that mean that then you've got less behavior incidents as a result?
I see that in the primary at least.
I think it could work both ways. I think if you've got too much differentiation and too much going on in your classroom, that could work in the opposite of what's
Right.
intended. But I could definitely see that at the lower levels.
Yeah.
They've got so much energy running through.
Yeah, but yeah, if we have too much of wiggle stools, or if all I were to
Yeah.
have is the crates, that wouldn't be beneficial to all students, because then I'm just pigeonholing them into that one flexible seating. Or
Right,
if it was
and-
just technology, that's not good either.
If kids are bored, they're going to maybe act out just because they have nothing better to do. Or if kids really aren't as strong academically as their peers, they're going to act out too. So, like, flexible seating isn't the, fix all.
Right.
So you have to know kind of what each kid needs in terms of, so does he need more support academically, or does
Mhm.
he need more support?
Or if you're not doing anything in the classroom.
Mhm.
I remember, this is one of my favorite sayings, and I remember it from a professor: avoid the void or they will fill it.
Oh yeah.
And that's definitely
good.
true. If you aren't doing anything in your classroom,
Yep.
if you're not keeping things moving, keeping things transitioning, they will find ways to transition themselves, and it's not usually in the direction you want it to go.
Interesting. Well, let's get back to the video quick.
Differentiated instruction begins with knowing who students are as learners. Effective differentiation also depends on knowing how and when to use multiple instruction strategies so that students have opportunities to learn in multiple ways. Ongoing
Okay, that raises another question for me. So, would you all agree that it's like depends on accepting the premise that students actually do learn better in different ways? So it depends on the mode of instruction for students, how well they learn. Would you agree with that? That it
Kids have
depends on-
always learned differently. Like, I'm a
Mhm.
very visual learner. I need to see it in order to really understand what's going on. But there are a lot of people who can like just hear it and
Right.
they understand. That's not ever been new. Like, that's been around.
Or
Right, this has just
like
been broken down now.
right, or someone can simply read a textbook and have an understanding of the
Mhm.
concept, or someone who needs it broken up for them verbally.
Well, so if there was evidence to the contrary that said that like learning styles was a myth, would that be sort of blasphemous as far as the dogma in education, or
That'd be crazy.
would that
That'd be crazy.
that would
I think colleges would say that learning styles is
Right.
blasphemous, because when you go to college, you get basically the one style, and that's the lecture.
Right. The whole point is like
Yeah.
to vary
And they
it.
tell us
Like,
to
if
do it
you're
different.
always lecturing, you're not going to hit like, yeah, I don't see how anyone could say that there aren't different learning styles. That's just
well, I don't think that's the claim though. What was
What's
what
the
being
claim?
claimed was whether or not that it really mattered as far as how much information could you absorb if you read it versus if you heard it, for example. Would there be an appreciable difference?
I think so, because it depends.
Yeah.
Like, if Desiree can read it and I'm a hands-on learner and Durley's a visual learner, it's going to be interpreted differently. If we just do hands-on, I'll excel in that. If we just read, I'm not going to excel. If it's just visual, you're going to excel. So,
right. The key is just the variety, like of it. So like, if you want to have kids read a passage, someone reads it out loud while they're reading it on their paper, so they get the visual and the auditory learning. So then it has a chance of hitting more kids. I mean, if you just lecture all the time, the kids who need to do something hands-on aren't going to absorb as much information as they would if they were able to do something to learn that.
Well, Mr. Grimm's pointed me to this article
Oh,
at
yeah.
some juncture about learning styles as a myth. I threw on my conspiracy glasses for this special occasion.
Okay.
So-
Also, notice this was written in 2015, so a few years old.
At 12:53 p.m.
So, well, maybe that just means that learning styles have been a myth for 4 years, Laura.
Yeah, maybe.
Can you blow it up, Jimmy?
Oh, zoom
Yeah.
zoom in.
I mean, I can kind of get some of it.
Oh, well, I don't think the picture is
Okay.
particularly. So a bunch of anecdotes here. Says that it's popular because parents understandably like to think that their children are receiving a tailored education. Teachers also understandably like to think that they're sensitive to each child's needs, and many are clearly motivated to find out more about how to fulfill this ideal. Also, no one likes to think of themselves as low in ability. It's more comforting to my ego to think that a class was difficult because of a teaching style I didn't like than because I wasn't concentrating or because I'm simply not clever or motivated enough. Now, it says here that they argue that there's a little bit of evidence to support.
Okay, so can I just point out something?
Sure.
And we haven't read the whole thing yet, but none of this is based on studies. This is based on opinion, someone thinking we're just using this as a scapegoat. I thought this was going to be like a study saying that.
Yeah.
Proving that this was a thing.
Yeah.
Well,
Wait, right there it says that. Yeah, surprisingly few studies.
Have produced.
Oh, produced evidence for learning styles.
Okay.
But is there evidence to produce
The opposite, like
right.
it's stating, because that first paragraph just is saying we're using it as a scapegoat with no proof that we're using it as a scapegoat.
Okay. Well, to your study point, surprisingly few studies of this format have produced supporting evidence for learning styles. Far more evidence, such as this study, runs counter to the myth. So, do you want to click on the study and take a look at it?
Does it break it down, or do we have to read it?
I don't know. I haven't followed the link, so I
Oh.
guess I don't know.
Let's take a peek. Take a peek. Take a peek.
We can
Wait,
look at
let's
it.
just read the rest. Okay,
Oh.
no, that's fine.
No, we can.
I just want to
got
read
it
the
in
rest
tabs,
of the
yeah.
paragraph.
Okay, so this makes sense.
Okay, so in reading this last half of the paragraph, it's not arguing that learning styles really aren't a thing to me. It's arguing that you need a combination of all of them.
Isn't that what I
I think that's what you kind of
earlier?
said, like you just said in the example. Individual preferences are fine, but on the nature of the material we're being taught. Just try learning French grammar pictorially or learning geometry purely verbally.
So it's
Mhm.
That's
supporting our
more
statement.
arguing that you need all types of learning styles. That's not proving that learning styles aren't a thing.
Well, I'm not sure that. Okay.
Unless I misunderstood what the main point of the article.
Well, I guess my take on this was that they're arguing. So, is the learning styles like what? How are they defining what the learning styles myth is, or what are they referring to here? And I think that what they're talking about is a claim that students learn better based on their preferred modality of instruction. So if you're an auditory learner, that's your learning style. You do best in a lecture setting or something.
If I'm being quite honest, I think what they say about kids saying teacher's teaching style is what the reason they're not doing well. I think kids use that, as a
an
reason not to
excuse.
focus. But I don't think our kids, have much metacognition, so they don't even realize what learning style they are.
Can you scroll up just a
To
little
be
bit?
quite honest.
Yeah.
Sure.
So right
How far
there,
up?
just right, that's fine. It's more comforting to my ego to think that a class was difficult because of a teaching style I didn't like than because I wasn't concentrating or because I'm simply not clever or motivated enough. Well, that's putting the blame on someone else. I didn't learn because you didn't teach me the right way versus I didn't learn because I didn't want to. Which kind of went to your point.
Right.
Well, do you want to take a look at the nuts and bolts of that study then
Sure.
a little bit, or? Okay. Now, you'll probably need to help me figure
Oh,
this business out because I am not down
let's
with
just
the
read
lingo.
the abstract.
Sure. So it says, if you'd like me to read it, college students, Experiment 1, and non-college adults, Experiment 2, studied a computer-based 31-frame lesson on electronics that offered help screens containing text group, or illustrations, pictorial group, and then took a learning test. Participants also took a battery of 14 cognitive measures related to the verbalizer, visualizer dimension, including tests of cognitive style, learning preference, spatial ability, and general achievement. In Experiment 3, college students received either both kinds of help screens or none. Verbalizers and visualizers did not differ on the learning test, and almost all of the verbalizer-visualizer measures failed to produce significant attribute X treatment interactions, ATIs. And there was not strong support for the hypothesis that verbal learners and visual learners should be given different kinds of multimedia instruction. Anything else that
Wait, go down.
down?
Yeah.
What are you looking for?
I was just reading the fine print.
Okay. Supported by Office of Naval Research grant, that part?
Yeah.
Something in Chinese, produce computer-based lessons. Okay. For more on this paper, blah, blah, blah.
Can we go back up because you read too fast?
Okay.
And so I
I'm
couldn't
still processing.
like follow along.
Thanks for the differentiation.
I'm not a teacher, so I don't know how to do that kind of thing. Not strong support for the hypothesis that verbal learners and visual learners should be given different kinds of multimedia
I
instruction.
know, but I want to read about what the actual experiments were.
So you're
I
looking
want
for
to
a
get-
hole to
Yeah.
punch in the
Oh yeah, I am.
This is higher order
the,
thinking.
the study,
This is analysis.
right? Yeah, it's to,
Well, one thing too is the study was done on college students and non-college adults. So, how does this also, like, my question is, how does this relate to a kindergarten teacher or student or a high school student? Because the brains of the people in this study are more developed than that of the high school. So maybe they're more capable of learning in either way because their brains are more developed. So they've acquired some of those skills where high school or lower level kids
Have that.
don't have that brain development yet to know how to process information even if it's not in their preferred or, best learning style.
well, certainly more studies and more work could be done. This is just one snippet, so we can't obviously make huge sweeping conclusions about something. But I mean, this is contrary evidence to some of this learning style stuff. Now, if we could do in a hypothetical situation, if there were more and more evidence that suggested that the learning styles, the claims about learning styles were undermined by specific evidence, and how does that change some of the differentiation stuff in schools? Would that be sort of a paradigm shift then?
If that were true, I just don't foresee it being true. They'd be able to. I mean, because like Durley said about the college students versus non-college students, and saying that the verbalizers and visualizers didn't differ at all. I mean, it's really not a true class setting whatsoever. So I don't really see much validity.
Well,
in this.
we can talk. I'm speaking
Right.
more broadly than just this study.
Right.
And it comes off that these experiments were done via tests. Now, assessments are totally different from an instruction.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah,
they're
so-
arguing different styles of test going with the learning styles, but an assessment is not learning.
Mhm.
Right.
It's not the activity. So when I think of learning styles, I think of the actual activities you used.
Right. Not the assessment.
Yeah.
Well, and it also wouldn't necessarily lend itself to, okay, well, maybe if it's okay, well, maybe we can't necessarily prove that you learn less from hearing or
Right.
reading or whatever, but if the classroom setting is more enjoyable because it's your
Your
preferred
learning
method
style.
or something, there's maybe some value and utility in that too. So, I just brought it up because it was something sort of a little bit counter, and I wanted to hear what everybody thought about. Well, okay, so let's say if this takes off and then is suddenly the thinking changes, then how would differentiation then evaporate? Or
I don't
No,
think
because
it's
it
gonna
doesn't
change how
just-
people teach.
That just applies to the learning styles. It doesn't apply to environment or
Right.
assessments yet. So,
so
and differentiation, as we've discussed, is just so broad.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'd like to see what the results of this study or study similar to that would be. Like, my other question is, so it's a computer-based 31 frame lesson on electronics. Well, what does that mean? Like, is it how electronics work, or is it just identify which piece of electronic this is? Is this a headphone? Is this a speaker? You know? And so, like, is it information they already know? And second, is it so elementary that of course they can learn it via text or pictures, that it really doesn't matter because the content is so easy that it's
Right.
And I guess just kind of obviously, I think all three of us sitting here are in support of learning styles. I think the learning styles connects to this buzzword, brain-based education. And I don't remember what side of the brain is responsible for what, but one side's more responsible for objective, black and white thinking, and one is more responsible for interpretive. And so that's why in my classroom, like, for example, when I do vocabulary, I give pictures. Laura has seen this. I give pictures for kids who think about it interpretively, and then I also give the written definition for kids that need it black and white. And I'll even have those kids on a test as they're taking the test want me to project the visuals because it helps them with understanding what the different definitions are. So
I don't know. Sounds like a bunch of word salad apologetics to me.
I don't know what
It's a
apologetics.
joke, girls.
what's word
What's
salad
it?
apologetic?
Bunch of
Apologetics.
Word
mumbo
salad.
jumbo.
See, your jokes aren't funny because they don't even make sense.
Kyle would be laughing.
Well,
I guarantee Kyle.
Kyle
is
doesn't
not
count.
smart either.
Kyle said
Oh.
facts don't care about your feelings. And he also said an assessment is not learning, question mark.
No, you don't teach by just giving an assessment.
Right. We don't do learning
Assessments
style.
don't teach.
Assessments
The teachers
assesses
teach.
the learning.
The
Yeah.
learning style that we had as the activity. We don't learning
I don't
styles
just,
are
I
not
just
part
don't
of
sit
assessments.
there and give my kids a ton of assessments and say, "Oh, you're learning this because I'm seeing what you know." I have to actually teach it first.
Yeah, G-Man.
Okay. Now I want somebody to explain to me
Yeah,
what.
assessments are a measure of learning. It's not the learning.
You should be here, Kyle.
I wish he
You're
was.
fired.
I need him. I'm doing my best to run the show.
No, I
And
mean, as
play
an
devil's
educator.
Laura
advocate.
is
Yeah,
running the
not-
show.
Not show up to
Not
work
pro
on
Jimmy.
Monday.
So, okay. Somebody explain to me what standards are in education.
A pain in the ass.
Nobody listens to him.
Well, no, it's not that nobody listens to them. Is that we're not tested over the standards we're expected to teach. That's the problem. No, standards are a list of content and skills that all students should learn in certain areas of their educational career.
Yep.
Do one of you know where I could quick bring up an example of a standard?
Iowa Core Doc.
Iowa
Gov.
Core.
Gov.
And is it sort of like a code book?
I know
or-
one at the top of my head.
Okay.
SBL.
Hi-
I don't know like the letters for it and whatnot, but like what one for writing standards would be students must establish a claim with supporting reason and evidence, both research based in through their own knowledge. Something along the lines of that.
So where do I
Then-
go after this,
Go
Laura?
to just
You
That's-
exit.
I only remember
You
the
exit out.
That's I only remember that because that's what I'm
Right
working
here?
on right now. So usually I have to look them up.
do
Thankfully,
browse
mine take a
by
little longer.
subject probably,
But you have all that emotional.
Okay.
Yeah.
and
That's okay, I
just
love it, like,
choose
just
like math.
Okay, it's taking a little longer.
Social studies it is.
That's
Well,
fine. I know those two.
Yeah.
And
Okay,
they're all
choose the
beside
one
you
that
can
none of-
pull up the
Hey, and a lot
PDF.
of these are writing based now, so I might know.
Yeah,
some.
the
I'm
social
glad you didn't
studies
choose
does have a
science, so
new
Kyle
set of
can't pick us
standards.
apart.
Along the side is a PDF that you can pull up that has.
I don't think I've got Adobe on this thing, so let's do it like this.
Bring on the questions, Kyle.
Yeah, he hasn't been saying anything for a little bit.
I don't know if social. Okay, anyway, keep.
So, what's an inquiry? Let's see, am I on the camera or the display here? Okay, inquiry anchor standard versus content anchor standard. What's that?
Okay,
Explain
why don't
that
you
real
open
quick.
one up?
What grade are we in?
11th.
Oh.
I just picked a random
Okay.
number.
Oh, see, there's one right there. Develop claims using evidence.
Mhm.
How do I do this?
So, like, the social studies has content-related standards. So, like, and the Iowa core includes Iowa like history stuff as well. But like one might be like kids will learn about women's suffrage. I mean, that's a generalization. It's more specific than that. But then they have these inquiry standards, which ties to the literacy and other components. So these are more of like the skills or the doing. So it's not the content, it's the skill behind the content. So, and these are the ones that apply across the board.
As its foundation. We're not
Mhm.
worried. We're not worried about memorization of facts anymore.
It's
We're
how can
worried
you
about
use those?
how do
What
we
can
use
you
those
do with
facts?
it?
What can we develop
Mhm.
from it?
So, are these actual standards here? What I've got?
Yeah, that SS 912.6.
Okay.
Yeah.
Identify evidence that draws information directly and substantively from multiple sources to detect inconsistencies in evidence in order to revise or strengthen claims.
We kind of just did that a little bit.
Yeah,
Mhm.
but that would be used in connection to a content standard. So maybe in terms of like World War II, there might be some content that maybe is like maybe there's a conspiracy theory around World War II or information that has been presented about it. So kids would use this inquiry standard to help learn or prove their learning of the content standard behind it. So they're kind of intertwined, which is new. This is
Okay.
just rolling out to them. They're in like year 3 maybe of the rollout plan.
And usually
Social studies.
a lot of standards have like one skill or more than one skill involved in it. So not only is it being able to establish a claim in support, but finding that support from multiple sources. And I'm assuming multiple valid sources, not just.
Right, and that would be another skill at some point down the road. I don't know which grade level it is, but the skill would be determining which sources are actually valid. And of course, there'd be a better way to write that as the standard, but so they'd learn the skill of what is a valid source prior to having to use multiple sources to detect inconsistencies in evidence.
So, are we
And-
sort of unpacking the
Yes,
standard
Yeah.
that
right
is
now?
unpacking the standard, Kyle.
Earl, you're making a face. Let's hear about it.
I prefer not to unpack standards at 8:55 at night
Yeah,
for the 11th
well,
grade in
part of the
social
thing,
studies
too,
content.
is like just understanding what comes prior to the standards. So like in math, since it builds off each other, if a kid doesn't know how to simplify an equation, well, is it because they don't know how to subtract at all, or is it because they don't understand how like inverse operations work? And so here's a high school skill. Where down the road did they develop
that.
some sort of misunderstanding or misconception or just have a hole in their knowledge? And so that's part of unpacking too, is understanding what comes before it so that you can help the kid meet the standard they're supposed to.
In my own example, only to support Laura's claim. So if you're using sources within a piece of research writing, your citation should only come after your research, but you have to know how your research fits into a paragraph structure. So you have to know the paragraph structure before you can tie in the research.
I mean, probably the only thing I like about unpacking the
Force it all
standards.
into this.
Yeah.
The one thing I like about unpacking the standards that it's helped, at least for the primary grades, and I'm sure the higher grades would agree, that when you find that hole, if students are struggling with addition and subtraction in whatever area, then once we've unpacked the standards, because you should as an educator know these standards already, so when you unpack it, you know what's being talked about, is that I can go and say, hey, the grade above me, kids are struggling with this. Do you see that? What holes can we fix? And also the grade below me, I can also talk to them, and they could say they're coming in with this. And so unpacking the standards has helped that those conversations start, because a lot of times I don't think those conversations.
And
were-
maybe you already touched on this, but I don't
nicely
think
fostered.
unpacking standards is about demonstrating understanding of them. I think unpacking standards is all about how do you go about creating your scope and sequence?
Right.
Right, the application
Right.
part.
Yeah.
Yeah, the part about unpacking that I don't like is when you have to, so like, identify evidence that draws blah blah blah. So unpacking to some people is, all right, let's go ahead and circle the verbs. So what are we doing?
No, thank
And then
you.
let's circle the parts of knowledge. So what would
I
they
have
know?
never had to do it, but I understand the concept.
Yeah,
Yes, we
so
had to do
me,
that as well.
That part is a waste of time. It's understanding what, like, you already know what you're supposed
Right,
to teach.
you
so
should know what
you
that
shouldn't
standard
have
means.
To unpack that standard because you already know what it means. You're the expert in that area. It's how can you help kids reach that standard and figuring out where the holes are coming into it so you can better reach them.
And there's your
fill those holes.
differentiation. Those conversations come with that.
Right.
Yeah, all of this stuff really is interconnected.
Yeah.
Just the yeah.
So okay, we were on that's inquiry anchor
Yep.
standard. Okay, so there's two sets of standards. Am
Yeah,
I
because
following it?
you want to connect them together.
So this is a subject matter, the
Yes.
content. Okay.
So
no-
like in math, they have the content standards, algebra, geometry, stats, and probability, but then they have the 8 math practices, which is like the inquiry standards of social studies. What are the skills behind the math?
And interestingly enough, in language arts, we don't have content per se.
Yours
Ours is
are
all
skill.
skill based. Yeah.
But the other interesting thing is all those skills are now being applied to every other.
Yes.
Content.
For example, like teaching Shakespeare, it does not say in our standards that we're required to teach Shakespeare by any means.
Interesting.
So there's kind of this new age thought that Shakespeare is kind of a
like old hat.
like it's just teachers teaching it because they're English snobs, essentially, is what it is. Like we can't throw out Shakespeare because it's Shakespeare. It's not
Right,
like
but
it's,
what is it
I
doing?
have to teach
Right.
that. It's not in the standards whatsoever.
Yeah, it's more understanding complex text, right?
Right. Yeah.
And you can choose what that complex text is. It doesn't have to be.
Right.
necessarily.
Yep.
Okay. So this one is a subject matter standard for Iowa history in the subject area of geography.
Yep.
Identify and evaluate Iowans or groups of Iowans who have influenced Iowa's environmental or cultural geography.
Mhm.
So, what's cultural geography? I'm not following.
The cultures of different regions of the state. So like the culture of one part of the state might be different from another part.
I would think in order to make distinctions there would have to be pretty detailed analysis going on.
And research, which goes
And-
back to
Right.
that
That's why
standard.
there's the inquiry standards because then they meet those skills in
Mhm.
developing the knowledge and ability to meet that content.
And is it is it some part of the legislator that's coming up with this stuff, or where is it coming from?
The standards themselves.
Yeah, who's writing the standards?
A bunch of people who've never been in education or are far removed from it.
Right, but
That-
I mean,
that's
they
true to
must.
say
It must
that.
be a different group of people because the standards, as they're being redeveloped, I think better meet the needs of our students than the standards as they were in when we were.
I
going
like
through
how it's
school.
I like how it's
I
skill
agree.
based.
Yep. And
Yep.
that's across the board, like the NGSS standards combines. There's like 3 strands to it. So yeah, there's science content in it, but you're also doing a cross-cutting concept, and you're so you have your disciplinary core, and then the cross-cutting concept, and then what is the other one? Gerard, whatever your name is over there, engineering or something, design. There's 3 strands.
Oh, in the science one.
Yeah, and so it doesn't just teach just science content, it changes the way in how you teach science and what kids are doing with science.
Are there other parts to this where there's more detail on the subject matter? Because I had a sort of a preconceived notion about these standards that it was like, if it's kindergarten or something, students will learn the alphabet, or students will be able to, count to 100 or something, whatever it might be. And it seems to me that it's a little bit like more open-ended than that.
Yeah, well, math is probably the one that's still maybe the most like what you think. So go back to subjects and choose math.
Okay.
And sometimes for the primary grade, there's multiple skills in a standard. For that reason, I don't know why.
And
That's
I'm not sure how
frustrating.
it looks on the site because I have the PDF version of it, but
So what grade should I?
choose 9th grade.
9th grade.
So like math is split up with different like
Which one, Laura?
parts of math. It doesn't matter.
Algebra?
Sure.
Can you explain it to us? So here's
Oh,
a
that looks
lot,
like a
all sorts of
headache.
stuff.
No, that's not the standards. Scroll down. There we go.
Oh, that was just the intro to the standards.
Right,
huh?
that explains what all of them are, and then just click on
In case you didn't know.
scene structure and expressions. Just find the top one or any of
Bunch
them.
of gobbledygook.
He's sus.
And
By the way,
then
Earl's
choose
even in
any
5
of
minutes. The game
those.
started.
Oh.
Which one?
Either one is
Okay.
fine.
We'll go with this
It's
one.
for everybody.
So since you chose algebra, all kids who are in algebra should learn this scene structure and
Sorry.
expressions.
I'm Peace Mountain 5.
Um,
9 too.
so all
Sorry,
kids in
Darlie.
algebra should learn how to choose and produce an equivalent form of an expression in real blah 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 blah. So is that more of what you're thinking?
Yeah, well, I guess my ideas ahead of time were it would just be a list of stuff that you're supposed to know.
Yeah, this
And-
is. If you saw the PDF version, it would have them all listed out.
Okay. Yeah, but I mean the geography one we read wasn't as specific as I thought it would be. I thought it'd be like be able to point to Africa on a map or something
It
like
used
that.
to be.
Okay.
And then this is year 3 of the rollout of the new standards. So they've changed a lot in terms of they've condensed it and made it more general because there again it's
Gross.
focused more on the skill than the actual content knowledge, because a lot of information in history you can just look up. Why would it really be useful to be able to memorize where every country in Africa is when you have your phone with you and you can look it up on Google?
Mhm.
But it'd be more useful in determining are the facts that we're learning about Africa actually relevant or accurate, and how can I use that to create my own understanding of what's actually going on in Africa.
Okay.
Well said, Darlie.
And this is a little bit
Thanks. That's why they
I've
pay
got
me
a-
big bucks.
what was that? Oh yeah, Laura's
Big man.
offering all her information. Well, it sort of changed my mind.
I'm counting this as a couple hours of work. No.
Because I was sort of operating under the idea that what standards are is a big list of stuff that everybody's supposed to learn. And then, also try to reconcile that with this idea of differentiation where, students are unique and there's got to be a
And that's
certain
what
amount of
makes it
tailoring.
hard.
And yeah, and it
Mhm.
seemed to me that the two concepts were sort of at odds with one another almost, at least the way I was thinking about standards
Mm-hmm.
being a big list of stuff, because it's like, well, which way do you want it? Do you want it everybody learns the same stuff, or is everybody a unique person and should have kind of their own path through school?
Right, and
But
the old school of thought is that what you were looking for in terms of student learning is progress.
Mhm.
Now
Mhm.
we don't just want progress. We want everyone to be at this level or above that level,
Mhm.
proficient or mastery. And the realism of it is just never going to be that way.
Well, and especially with the shift from what we grew up with, what kindergarten looked like is not what kindergarten looks like now. And it's like everything's gone down a grade. So the expectation of kindergarten was like what it was in first grade and so on and so forth. So then you add trying to be at that level and the high expectation, and developmentally, whatever grade you may be at, kids aren't always there. And if they struggle, you're way behind. And I don't feel like it's meeting the needs of those that just take more time.
interesting. Good stuff. Or Earl, did you say you needed to leave soon? Or
Yes, Iowa State is on, and
Okay.
they're only down by 1.
Okay.
G-Mon, any questions? Sorry, it's too late.
No, that's all right. We've been on for over an hour, so I don't have any more material unless people had stuff that they wanted to bring up specifically.
Next
Um,
podcast, Backstreet Boys, when I come back.
Yeah, we can do a Backstreet Boys one.
Desiree,
Backstreet Boys podcast. I don't know much about Backstreet Boys history.
we can talk.
I can throw out a song or two.
She's in.
Don't worry, we won't have to talk. Earl will take over this time.
Deal.
Well, we all know that Brian is poop, so
We'll
on that
save this
note, we'll end the
argument.
episode. Thank you, ladies, for this is the most substantive podcast I think we've had so far. The rest of it's been,
Courtesy of me.
Girl power.
You sus. That means all the guys sus.
Conversation. Other
You guys
nonsense.
really talked about that?
Yeah, and it's
I
disgusting.
didn't listen to that one. I guess.
That was a hilarious video. It was free range parents and the lady like ate her placenta.
They turn that into pills too.
I'll listen to that next week.
It was
Some
Probably.
people have
Drody.
fried it up.
That's
Yeah, it's
disgusting.
disgusting. I don't.
That's fun.
Good. I'm glad. I hope it was okay.
Yeah, that was cool.
I didn't.
Are we still recording?
Shouldn't be.
Oh,
I don't know. Maybe we are a little bit.
there we go.
Oh,
Anyway, it's done.
Yeah, that was fun.
that was fun.
Yeah.
Good. I hope it was fun. We have
Thanks,
everybody
Kimmy.
back again.
That was good.